You can now download a free PDF copy or a beautiful printed copy of issue number 6 of the new Thinking Aloud magazine.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be looking at the qualities of high-performing individuals. My guest is Dr. Lee Pulos, a clinical psychologist from Vancouver, British Columbia. Dr. Pulos is on the faculty of the Medical School of the University of British Columbia. He's also the sports psychologist for the Team Canada, the Canadian Olympic team, and has also worked with the Edmonton Oilers hockey team. In addition, Dr. Pulos is an entrepreneur and has worked as the Chief Operating Officer for the Spaghetti Factory chain of restaurants and is a former president of the Canadian Academy of Clinical Hypnosis. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Always enjoy being in this area.
You've worked with peak performers in many different fields, in business and athletics. You've also spent a lot of your professional career working with cancer patients.
Yes. My ideas on high-performance people are based on my work as an entrepreneur, having founded a large, successful restaurant chain, cancer counseling, and, of course, working with business people. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed that all of them have certain commonalities that they share that help them get to where they wish to go.
Yeah. That's interesting because one would assume, that the characteristics, say, of a top athlete would be different from those of a top business person.
Not really. They all have the same qualities that seem to motivate them and that they share in common.
Uh-huh. Well, let's talk about some of those
Well,
qualities.
I think one of the most important qualities is they have a burning vision, a goal, mm-hmm. something they can see in their mind, and something that the goal is something they see in the future but bring it into the present as mm-hmm. if it has happened. Mm-hmm. And every single person has this vision. And goal setting is critically important. As a matter of fact, there have been a number of studies, or more and more psychologists beginning to look at the whole issue of goal setting. For example, in a study in Yale, working with convalescent patients, a psychologist named Judith Rodin separated them into two groups. One group were given a potted plant. It sounds so mundane.
Sounds kind of trivial.
It does.
But it gives them a goal, I suppose, if they're going to care for this plant.
Well, they were told to take care of the plant.
Yeah.
The other group, of course, were told, don't worry about it, nursing staff will take care of it. Mm-hmm. And after 18 months, they looked at three variables: social factors, medical factors, and longevity. Uh-huh. Because the expectancy in a convalescent home like that is about 18 months. Mm-hmm. Well, the group that had no purpose, no goal, let's say, died within the expected period. Mm-hmm. The other group had actually reduced or increased their life expectancy almost twofold. I mean, longer, twice as long, which worked out to be about 14 months longer than what they had been expected to do.
In other words, all other factors being equal, simply having a potted plant to take care of made a big difference in the life of these convalescing patients.
Then, of course, they began adding to that and seeing if they a control group versus experimental group, the ones who had more to say as to what kind of clothing, they're planning their meals, a television program. In other words, having a sense of control and power and purpose in their life.
You gotta have a goal.
That's it.
That seems to be the
versus
real
the
message.
Ones that didn't.
Many people, it would seem, and I suppose these would be non-high achieving people, sort of wander about.
That's right. That's right. But related to this whole issue, Jeffrey, is a feeling of empowerment. Mm-hmm. Once you have a goal, a vision, you feel much more empowered. As a matter of fact, there was another classical study at UCLA called the Learned Helplessness Experiments, mm-hmm. where they took an animal, he learned how to get through a maze, and they put him into a leather harness and shocked him and shocked him and shocked him, and then released him from the leather harness, and even though the animal knew how to get out, it just stood there and received the shocks. It had learned helplessness.
Because he was in the harness for a while and was unable to move.
That's right.
During the
but
shock.
Then if you were to extrapolate this into the work situation, For instance, in factories, the people on the line seem to have more psychosomatic disorders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because there is this learned helplessness. Things are happening to them rather than from them.
And they have the feeling that they no longer possess control
That's
of their
right.
situation.
Power.
And I suppose as a psychologist, you'd have to say that a lot of that is their attitude rather than really what's true about them.
That's right. It is strictly in the attitude of having, in a sense, given your power, perceived you've given your power away to someone else. And I think this is one thing that high-performance people do not do. They are totally in charge of what happens to them.
Would you say then that if a person feels like that their life is out of control, and sometimes, as I have with therapy clients, and you've probably seen, people give you enormously elaborate rationales about why they can't control this, why they can't control that, would it seem to you that these people are lacking in creativity?
No, I think control and blaming others is really related to self-esteem, which is the second quality of high-performance people, is that they will create situations in which they're always building on their self-esteem, their attitude with themselves, their reputation with themselves. And one of the things that detracts from self-esteem is blaming someone else. Giving your power to someone else, blaming the weather, or blaming this, blaming that, blaming that. High-performance people do not do that.
In other words, if a person has low self-esteem, they can avoid having to feel bad about themselves by blaming other people instead.
That's right.
And then they're generally unaware of the fact that it's really their own low self-esteem.
That's right. And they're not aware that when you blame someone, or even taking on a martyr role, which is part of our Judeo-Christian ethic, having to work hard and suffer and struggle, nothing comes easy sort of thing, again, that really detracts from one's sense of potency or empowerment and self-esteem. So there is no blaming, and there is no martyrhood or struggle. I mean, these people view life as something to be lived joyously, impeccably, and to go through it, having fun.
They relish their experiences.
Rather than struggle. Because if you keep sort of programming your unconscious that everything is going to have to be hard work, then it becomes just that, and success becomes difficult.
So it's really ironic. It's as if we have certain very, very basic assumptions, like life must be difficult, that we wouldn't even question.
That's right.
And yet what you're saying is the high-performance individuals that you've known and studied are people who don't take that attitude.
That's right.
Is it something that can be trained? I mean, can people learn to change these attitudes?
Absolutely. And this gets to another factor of high-performance people, and that is they're constantly monitoring their self-talk. Like every single person self-talks between 150 and 300 words a minute.
Constant stream.
Constant. And it works out to 45, 50,000 thoughts a day.
Isn't that amazing?
Now, if you think about it...
It'd be a good book a day for everybody.
Absolutely. Now, most of it is innocuous, like I wonder what I'm going to wear tonight, or how is it going to go, where are we going to go for dinner, but a lot of it, of course, especially with people low esteem, I'm so stupid, nothing works for me, I can't lose weight, I can't stop, and so on.
It's negative.
Over and over and over.
Like hypnotic
and over
suggestions.
Again. Absolutely. Absolutely.
In other words, what you seem to be saying is, if I hear you right, it's as if this level of great competence and high performance would be a natural state for virtually everybody if we didn't kind of program ourselves somehow into having a low self-esteem.
Yes, because our self-talk is one of the things that keeps reinforcing information in our subconscious, our reputation with ourselves. So high-performance people are very conscious of that. And they'll they'll stop it right away and change it to something else. You never hear someone saying things about themselves that is deprecatory or like that. And yet, when you look at the origin of it, again, a rather interesting study at Iowa, where they went into the homes of typical Iowan community members with little people, with children. And the psychology grad students took a counter of the number of times positive or negative utterances that a parent would make in the course of a day. And they averaged it out over a 3-week period. In the course of one day, there were 432 negative utterances made
What
to a
would be
child.
an example of a
Oh,
negative?
you stupid child. There you go again. You've done it again. You're such a mess. versus...
I mean, it's not simply saying, no, don't do that.
No. I mean, it's, you know, darn it, you've done it again.
Something that would lower the self-esteem
Precisely.
of the child.
So that happened in an average of 432 times a day versus 31 positive statements a day.
And that's in your typical Iowa household.
Middle-aged America. You know,
Middle America, yeah.
So that's another aspect of it all, that they very, very, very carefully watch their self-talk.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, on the contrary, they're constantly programming positive self-talk.
So it almost sounds like if we were to take that as a generality, that maybe for every 432 people with low self-esteem, you've got about 32 with a high self-esteem.
Possibly. But self-esteem, there is a general factor to self-esteem, but there are also certain areas in your life in which you can have high and low self-esteem. But if you put them all together, you get sort of a general factor involved. And of course, all kinds of studies that are emerging that people with low self-esteem are more subject to psychophysiological stress disorders and so on. So it affects us on all levels, Jeffrey, very much so.
Well, do you find in looking at high-performing individuals that they've gone through periods of low self-esteem and then come out of that? For example, in business, you hear cases like Walt Disney, who went bankrupt 7 times before he was a success. Do people actually transform themselves in the process of becoming a high performer?
Well, I think a lot of people will take models. A lot of high performance people read biographies of people in their field, and they find out what these people think like, what they feel, what they do, and they begin emulating them. And they have a kind of a role model and begin incorporating, interjecting some of their qualities and characteristics.
This must involve a good deal of visualization ability.
Well, visualization is another one of the qualities, mental rehearsal. They're constantly in their mind's eye running a mental movie of what it is that they wish to achieve, constantly. Much of my work with athletes, for instance, I've worked with a couple of Canadian swimmers, where they would visualize every single stroke of the race, and the feeling of the water, the sound of the crowd as they're going up and doing their flips, everything. As a matter of fact, they would take turns timing each other, and they would be within 1 second of the splits in the various laps. That's how close their visualization matched the actual performance. And of course, I think everyone is aware of the sorts of things that has been done in cancer counseling using mental imagery.
Why don't we review that for a moment?
Well, this is based on the work of Carl Simonton, a radiological oncologist who used relaxation techniques and mental imagery to augment the chemotherapy, radiation, and regular medical treatment that the people were receiving. And a typical example of some of the imagery, for instance, one woman with lung cancer would imagine herself going into her lung with a vacuum cleaner and vacuuming away diseased tissue and then coming in with a medicated spray. 14-year-old boy with terminal leukemia went into his bloodstream dressed like the Lone Ranger, all in white. And every time he saw a leukocyte, he'd pull out his 6-shooters and kill a leukocyte and taunt it would haul away the dead leukocytes.
And these people were then successful in overcoming a disease like cancer.
Well, with terminal patients, after 5 years, 26% of his population were still alive.
People who would otherwise have
not
been
be alive. And there was an increase in the quality and quantity and longevity of life. Of course, there have been a number of other studies on mental rehearsal, particularly in the sports field and in business.
Well, I suppose since the East Germans, I think it was in the Montreal Olympics, began winning all the medals, the news came out that they were working with visualization.
Not only the East Germans, but it was the, actually it was the Russians after the 1976 Olympics in Montreal, since they were going to have the Olympics in 1980, wanted to set up a showpiece for the world. And they split their athletes into 4 groups. Group A, 100% physical practice, traditional. Group B, 75% physical, 25% mental, 50-50, Group C. And Group D was 75% mental practice and 25% physical. Now these were all world-class athletes. They had all the skills. At the end of the Moscow Olympics and Lake Placid Olympics, they counted the number of medals that each group had won. Group 4, 75% mental, 25% physical, had won the most medals, and there was an inverse relationship.
75% mental, 25% physical. And that was the most optimal way to prepare
yes,
for
absolutely.
competition.
when I first started working with athletes in 1967 with the Canadian national volleyball team, I was the only sports psychologist to my knowledge in Canada, and there may have been 3 or 4 in the United States. Today, every single team in Canada has a sports psychologist, and their primary function is teaching them how to mentally rehearse, make mental movies, mentally preparing themselves, building up self-esteem, and so on. Critical. And goals, again. There's another example I wanted to give with respect to goal setting. A very good friend of mine, when he took over as chairman of the board, CEO of a large corporation, sat down with vice presidents and wondered what their goals or vision was for the company. And it was somewhat disjointed. So he thought, what can I do? He went out and purchased a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. And he removed the top, put the pieces all on the floor, and he said to them, look, this is an exercise in communication and team building. I'd like to see you work together as a team, put the pieces together. And they said, oh, great. And after about 15 minutes, there was a little bit of jostling and that sort of thing, and he could see that things are getting a little testy.
So they didn't have the picture?
No picture. Then he said, look, I've got the picture in the next room, but I'm going to take you in here one at a time and show you the picture, since this is an experiment in team building, communication. So the trick of the experiment was he showed them 9 different box tops. So they had 9 different pictures. When they came out, of course, it was absolute chaos. And finally said, stop, I cannot stand this. And he showed them the picture. And of course, they put it together in a matter of 10, 15 minutes. Question, how many of us are in a relationship, in a company, in a corporation, in a team, that have no idea what the big picture is?
Or have different goals.
Or different goals, different expectations.
So the key to a really successful high-performance team is where everybody is working towards the same goal, and they all understand that goal.
That's right. That's right. And of course, looking for ways to build up self-esteem within both the corporation, the team, and individually. High-performance people are always going out of their way to build up self-esteem.
Well, how do you overcome years and years of programming since childhood, if you grew up in Iowa or someplace like that, where you've been inundated with negative remarks?
You change it the same way you learned it. You begin substituting the negative self-talk, the negative images, the negative expectations with positive ones. It's exactly the same way you learned it in the first place.
And how do you do that?
Well, you begin being aware of the kinds of things you say to yourself.
You have to monitor your
In other words,
thoughts.
you're affirming things to yourself negatively or positively all the time. So an affirmation, let's say if I were to try to lose weight, I can't lose weight, it runs in the family, diets never work for me, I would change that. Every day and every way I'm finding it easier and easier to achieve my goal of weighing 165 pounds or whatever it may be. I'm finding it easy to lose weight. I feel good about myself as I'm looking healthier and feeling better and so on.
What you seem to be saying, and I hope I'm not pushing your point too far, is that really we're all hypnotizing ourselves all the time, and hypnosis is a powerful force that we all need to learn how to use in a positive manner.
Precisely.
There's no avoiding hypnosis.
Well, first of all, there's dehypnotizing yourself from your old suggestions. Because if you have 45 to 50,000 thoughts a day, that's an awful lot of subliminal kinds of input that you're putting into yourself and that you're not aware of. And we know from the research, of course, that subliminal programming is very powerful and very effective. So we're doing it to ourselves. You're not aware of 45, 50,000 thoughts a day, are you?
No, I haven't counted.
No. I mean, it just goes, it happens, and so on. So as you begin becoming aware of them and stopping them, that's critically important. The other thing, of course, related to companies is that there are high self-esteem companies that really foster and build the sense of self in people, and low self-esteem companies. A low self-esteem company, and my image for that is the pyramid, where there's power at the top, control, and the employee is there to be of service to the employer. The high self-esteem company, the image I think of as a circle, and they're, instead of power, they're looking for ways of empowering their employees, sending them to seminars, increasing their training, and so on. And instead of control, influence. Have you ever tried to control and influence a child at the same time? You can't. Influence is a much more powerful motivating factor than control. And thirdly, instead of having the employee being of service to the employer, high self-esteem companies have it just the other way around. How can we, the company, be of service to you, the employer, to make you a better person?
It seems in today's work environment, more and more of the labor force are demanding high self-esteem companies.
Absolutely.
Because people are coming more and more to realize that they want self-actualization out of their work. It's not enough to just take a paycheck home.
That's right. And there are other factors too. High self-esteem people are aware, in effect, that we learn and process information in different ways, and the old left brain, right brain hypothesis. And even though it's a metaphor, it's a useful metaphor, because there was a recent article in the Harvard Business Review on left brain planners, right brain managers.
Left brain being kind of very linear.
Linear, logical, analytical.
And the right brain being artistic.
Intuitive. Simultaneous processing of all kinds of information.
Right.
And they found that the left brain planner prefers long written memos versus the right brain manager, who prefers this kind of contact, looking at body language, facial expression, voice tonality, and so on. The right brain manager is a networker. They're connected to all kinds of things going on in the community. The doors are always open. You can come in and go. The phones are ringing. Simultaneity of activity versus the pipe smoking, sitting up in a lofty office type left brain planner, and so on and so on. So I think high performance people realize that it's important to oscillate back and forth between two modes of consciousness depending on the task, and not looking at the world through gun barrel vision type thing.
So they try and really live balanced lives.
Yeah. And again, finding ways of being more creative, which again is a right brain.
But what about the sense that we often have of a high-performance individual almost being compulsively neurotic, like, putting in 15, 16 hours a day training or at the office? Is that not true?
Well, I think that's more like a workaholic who's always looking for a 10, who's demanding perfection, when a 9 is good enough. Excellence is okay. and that's the difference, that they're hooked into the work rather than
You don't need
producing.
to be compulsive to be a high performer.
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, a lot of compulsive workaholics always have the better than attitude. In other words, how can I be better than someone else? Whereas the high performance person is looking at the issue, how can I be more than what I am now? And it's a subtle distinction, but an important one.
So they're really competing against themselves rather than competing against other people.
Precisely.
They're not driven in the same sense.
No.
But they must have a lot of drive.
They do. And there are a number of factors involved, but one is the desire, Jeffrey. You've got to have that fire in the belly, the desire to want to do what you are going to do. Secondly, the expectation, absolutely, the expectation that what you're going to do is going to work. No question about it. And thirdly, the imagination, using some of the things that we've talked about, the mental rehearsal, self-talk, and so on.
If you don't have that drive, what if you're basically, like many people are, and I've been in periods of my life, just kind of lazy, and yet, you want to make something more of your life? What would you do? Set a goal to have more drive?
Yes, absolutely. There have been times when I have found that my desire, my sort of fire in the belly has kind of waned. So I've made it part of my self-talk, my visualization has been to ignite that fire, to ignite that desire. And even though it doesn't happen right away, all of a sudden, gradually, I notice things start happening and boom, I get into it.
With Tom Peters talking so much these days about a passion for excellence, his new book, there seems to be a sense growing in the business community, and he speaks to so many people that having a passion for your work is essential.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But there are other factors too, Jeffrey. There's, we keep talking about the interpsychic kinds of factors with individuals. You can change what goes on in here. But high-performance people are also very important of the context in which they work, because we are in context. For example, 4 or 5 years ago now, I went to the Philippines. I've been gathering data on traditional healing methods all over the world. And I was fortunate, there were 2 groups of Americans seeing the same healer who happened to have a physician as an assistant. And they gave me permission to attend their meetings, observe the healings, and so on.
You're talking about the famous psychic surgeons of the Philippines.
The energy healers of the Philippines.
Okay.
And they were evenly matched groups, and they saw the same healer, let's say Group A, Group B. No one in Group A at the end of the 2 weeks got healed. everyone in Group B had various degrees of healing.
Isn't that interesting?
And I thought, how can this be? They're seeing the same healer, and so on. So I went back and reviewed my notes and listened to my tape recordings. There were 2 people in Group A who every time someone would get off the table, they would say, oh, I don't know, you don't look any better to me. I don't think this stuff works. Do you think they're faking it? I don't believe in it. And I called that group my psychic bleeders. Every time someone got up on the table in Group B, someone would be touching them. The moment they get off the table, they'd embrace them and say, I love you, you look great, you're doing terrific. You're looking better than you've ever looked. And I call them my psychic fountains. Question, how many of us are in a context with psychic bleeders because it bleeds off the energy, it bleeds off the enthusiasm, and depotentiates, a lot of things from happening.
A certain, like, cynicism.
In a way. And again, high performance people avoid bleeders. And they look for nourishing rather than toxic kinds of people.
Yeah. And I suppose it's because they have enough self-esteem where they say, I deserve better than this.
Precisely. Precisely. And they attract high self-esteem people.
Yeah.
And I guess, some people think, well, what do you mean by high self-esteem? How does that work in a relationship, let's say?
Right.
I'll never forget, I was practicing one time and I was treating this man for alcoholism. And he gave up drinking after several months. Immediately his wife divorced him and promptly married another alcoholic because her self-esteem was such to be that in the role of a Red Cross nurse and so on. And he immediately saw, once his self-esteem went up, then he attracted someone of like self-esteem. And that happens, I think, in corporations, individually, teams, and so on.
Well, I think the exciting thing about what you're saying, Lee, is that people can, by studying the characteristics of high-performing individuals, actually learn to change their lives to move more in that direction.
Absolutely. I think that's critical, to have a model, a hero, an ego ideal, whatever you want to call them.
And one of the key elements that you've mentioned, I know we've covered a few, there has been goal setting and visualization and having a drive.
Goal setting, mental rehearsal, watching yourself talk, being able to use both sides of the brain.
Learning how to work with affirmations.
Affirmations, and so on. Also, they're very health conscious and very careful of the sources of stress in their life. And we know, of course, there are physical sources of stress, or nutritional sources of stress, and psychological. And they're very careful in the way that they allow those to impinge on their everyday life.
Well, Dr. Lee Pulos, it's been a real pleasure having you with me today. I think you exemplify in your own life the qualities of a high-performance individual.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey.
Thank you very much for being with me.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for being with us.
Book 2 in the New Thinking Aloud Dialogues book series is a tribute to parapsychologist Russell Targ celebrating his 90th birthday.